US President Donald Trump is eliminating the country's diversity and inclusion programs, claiming they discriminate against white men. He's cracking down on immigrants and asylum seekers and repealing laws that protect trans people. But what effect might Trump's policies have here in the UK? I'm journalist Angela Walker, and in this podcast I talk to inspirational people and discuss underreported issues. My guest today is diversity and inclusion expert and author Mo Kanjilal. First, though, while you're here, please subscribe, like and comment if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening, please follow and review this podcast. That will mean it's recommended to other people. Hi, Mo. Thank you so much for joining me at this incredibly interesting time for diversity. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking about this more. It's something that I've been talking about with so many people, with so much going on in the world. So yeah, really looking forward to talking about this.
I mean, you've dedicated your whole career to diversity and inclusion. So how do you feel when you see these kind of policies that Donald Trump's rolling out?
I feel sad because it shows that he and the people around him and people who support what he's doing don't actually understand what diversity and inclusion policies are about, what the work's about. And I think it comes from a place of fear. It's fear that somehow things are going to be taken away from them. I think that's the root cause of where a lot of this comes from, and their feelings of superiority. So it mostly makes me feel sad. Of course, it does make me feel angry too, but I try and just control that and think, right, what do we do now? Because that's really what we have to think about. What do we do? What impact it's going to have on this country? How we can kind of level conversations about this kind of thing.
What impact do you think it's having here then when people in our country see, well, the US is just scrapping diversity programs? So, I mean, what impact does that have on us, do you think, as a community?
So, first of all, I think it's important to say that diversity and inclusion work isn't about checking boxes and filling in forms and that kind of compliance. There's an element to that. We have things like gender pay gap reporting in this country, but it's actually about transformational ways of working that include everyone. It's about much bigger things than that kind of compliance. And in a way, this will show those that thought it was just about checking some boxes and perhaps saying things they thought you should say. It will kind of highlight actually who does understand what this is about. So I think there will be an impact, particularly companies that are global companies that perhaps have US offices, or US owned companies where they have an office here. Those kinds of companies are going to see challenges. But broadly speaking, people who understand this kind of work understand what it's actually about. It's about transforming places, making workplaces better. And there's such a strong business case as to why it makes for better organisations. So it's going to take some time, but there's still all of that work to do.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you said about it comes from a place of fear, because, I guess white businessmen like Donald Trump, they've been at the top of the tree forever. And I don't think it's like they don't want to see other people raised up, but raising everybody else up doesn't mean bringing them down, does it?
That's the thing. That's what I mean by the place of fear. So there are lots of people that like to tell me that they don't see there's a problem, that they don't see colour, they don't see gender, that everything's fine for them, because it is. For people in dominant groups, things are largely fine. What this is about is encouraging ways of working and organisations and buildings and websites and all these things that mean that it levels and so that everybody can be included. And when we talk about these things, I often use the example of a building or a website. It's a good way to talk to people about it. So if a website is made accessible, so it has colour contrast, subtitles on videos, all of the accessibility features that you want to see in a website, you haven't taken anything away from anybody. You've just made a better experience for everyone. And that's what we mean. So often I take it to things like that when I'm talking to people so that they don't start to feel defensive. It's it's a good way of explaining what we mean by this.
That's such a good analogy. And also, I often have men saying, women aren't discriminated against because they've never experienced it in the way that we have, and that still in our everyday lives. There's a real push at the moment for let's get everyone back in the office. A lot of white middle class businessmen are saying there's nothing wrong, we did it before. Yeah, because it didn't affect you, because you weren't doing the school run and the big shop and the laundry and trying to juggle work and home at the same time. So no, it doesn't affect you. So I think it's really interesting, those points that you're raising. And I know that we've got a long way to go here in the UK when it comes to diversity. But and we saw that last year, didn't we, when we saw those race riots, and we saw a lot of what's kind of racist rhetoric going on. Are you worried that we're going to see more racism as a result of what's going on in the US?
Yeah, that's a real concern and something that's being talked about a lot. And, you know, the thing with that is, I think what the race riots showed last summer as well, is that those things are there. So when people say there's no work to do, well, there is, because those things, those people that think those things and say those things are there. It's only when they feel emboldened and that they can say these things out loud that you then start to see it very visibly. So I think that will happen. There will be people that think this is great and that they can say all of those things. But in a way, again, it just shows us how much work there is to do. It just shows us where our society actually is, in that people say that they might not say those things out loud, but they think those things. And there's this kind of polite face of racism where things might be said sort of very politely in middle class clipped tones, or, you know, comments might be made that actually under the surface, this is what people think. And that's why there is so much work to do. And we have to look at how these things are reported as well. We have to look at all of these things. So, you know, your podcast intro talks about finding stories that are not always reported in the news. And that's because who controls our news agendas? You know, who actually runs these companies producing the news? And actually we want to see different stories coming out because we don't see everything. And there's a lot of talk about the rise of citizen journalism. So people recording the news literally on their phones, that debunks a story that's put out by a traditional media organisation, or people just writing their own news, putting out their own content, which has two sides to it as well, because there's obviously, it's not just inherently going to be absolutely correct that one citizen thinks this because another citizen thinks that, because that's how our society is. But it's just interesting to see how these things are shifting and changing.
Yeah, and that's a really good point you made about who controls our news, because I wrote an article last year about, from the point of view of some people, Jewish people I know in London, who were feeling scared. And that article, when I put that on Twitter, my Twitter account was shut down. I was being silenced for showing that side of the argument. And I couldn't believe it. And it's never got back to the place it was. I mean, I've abandoned Twitter now anyway, but at that time, that was a platform where I had a lot of interaction. And that really showed me they're trying to shut me up. And that makes it even more important for us to do stuff like this podcast, because people will listen to this. I'm an independent journalist. No one is controlling me. And that's why I like to give a voice to people like you, Mo, because it is so important. And we saw Elon Musk on stage at the inauguration, and he gave what looked like a Nazi salute. And there have been people defending it, saying it was misinterpreted. He was throwing his heart to the crowd. He's got autism, Asperger's. It was a misinterpreted. What did you think when you saw that? I know what I thought. What did you think when you saw that?
I think he knew what he was doing. And I think these excuses that you're seeing, would they be saying that if someone else had done that salute? Would the same things be being said? So he's being excused. That kind of behaviour is being excused. And I think that's what has to be challenged by people. And it is being challenged by people, but I've been surprised at how many people I've seen who have defended him. That has really surprised me. Because,
I think, you know, the silence from some quarters has been deafening, actually. If I, on the public arena, did something that some people thought was a Nazi salute, I'd be mortified, and I'd be out there giving a public statement saying, I'm so sorry if that's what it looked like. I absolutely did not mean to do that. And I think the fact that we've not heard any kind of apology or any kind of recognition that it was open to interpretation, someone used the phrase plausible deniability, and I think that's really good. It's almost like, can I get away with it? And I don't know. Do you think some people just don't want to believe it and they're just turning a blind eye?
It's been fascinating. So can you imagine if one of us did that if I was going to give a talk and I turned up and I did that, like what would happen? So the people that are not saying anything or are trying to defend him, I think just need to really think about what they're excusing in a way. There has been some shocking comments and content on this. So I'd love to come back a bit more to social media platforms, but the one that's really surprised me is LinkedIn, which is the professional platform. There was a post that went viral of a woman who basically did the same salute and said, I'm just doing this hand on heart, like it doesn't mean what you think it does. And you think, wow, that's quite a big statement to be making, that you're defending him that publicly, that's what you're going to do. But just going back to social media platforms, like you, I used to love Twitter. It used to be the place where I got news, I connected with journalists, loads of opportunities came from it. I've just left my account dormant for now. But when you look at it, I mean, I haven't looked at it for quite a long time now, but it's just become this place where, well, basically all of Elon Musk's tweets, like they're not called tweets anymore, but all of his content is promoted, and it's what led to a lot of people supporting Donald Trump in the election. And the race riots as well, that was actually the point at which I said, that's it, I'm out, was last summer when that was happening, because I was like, I can't be on a platform where he's inciting that kind of violence in another country.
But, it's really an echo chamber for the people that are on it. So people that are on Twitter who are following certain accounts are being bombarded with these messages. And I think in a way it normalises it, because they feel like, well, that's the news, that's what's out there. And I feel like that a lot about social media. I mean, I come from a TV news background where a bulletin is curated by a group of news editors who are across the world news, and they're giving you the top stories from around the world, and that's been done in a considered way. They're not just bombarding you with the same stories again and again, which is really like a form of indoctrination. And I kind of look back to like the 1930s, and I think it was really the creep of Nazism. It didn't just happen overnight. It was really insidious, and a lot of people at the time just turned a blind eye. It didn't affect them, and then we look back and go, how did that happen? And I have a fear in me, like, that we're in the middle of something really historic, and it doesn't feel great, Mo,
Yeah, and there's lots of people that have said, actually, we should all stay on Twitter for that reason, that otherwise it would just turn in even more into an echo chamber if we're not all participating and like contradicting and showing people different, what the truth is and things that we believe. But there comes, for me anyway, there came a point where I was like, I just can't be there anymore. But I do see the argument from people that say, actually, you have to stay in these places and continue to have these conversations, because otherwise what's going to happen, we're just going to have everybody in their own echo chamber. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody else, only following people I like, unfollowing people I don't like on whatever platform I'm on. So we do need to think about the impact of that. What I find fascinating is how we find out information now and the news, because it isn't all just people reading newspapers. There's different online news sites, but they're controlled by different agendas, and then you've got all these different social media platforms. It's really fragmenting as to where people are getting their information.
Well, I teach at Oxford Brookes University. I teach journalism there, and I did a show of hands quite recently. Oh, who's watched a news bulletin in the last week? Out of about 60 students, none of them had watched a TV news bulletin, and they're journalism students. And that's not a criticism. It's an observation of how things have changed. And their go-to platform for most of them for news was TikTok, which was just so fascinating to me. I actually put my clips out from these podcasts on TikTok, and they get really good views and interactions. And the way that we consume our news has changed. But coming back to, the whole Trump scenario, and talking about holding people to account. I mean, we saw the Bishop of Washington, Marianne Edgar Buddy, urging Donald Trump to have mercy on the people in our country who are scared. And she listed groups of people. She said the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospital. And that was a woman in a position of authority using her platform to really hold him and his policies to account. And what a brave woman. I really want to see how stuff pans out for her, you know, in the coming months. And we saw the backlash from him almost immediately. There was a statement saying that her speech was like nasty and inappropriate. And I know you watched that as well, Mo. When you saw her literally from the pulpit, saying that to the President of the United States, what did you think?
I think, like you, I felt really emotional. I was like, this is somebody who's just thought, I'm going to do this. Very brave to do that. And I think just an example to so many people of the fact that, you know, if you have the opportunity, you've got to say these things. She was in front of those very people, what an opportunity to actually say those things out loud to those people. And yes, they immediately, you know, denounce it, but it's out there. It's there. And I'm sure there's been clips of that, what she said, shared across all social media platforms, because it really was impactful. Like one of the most impactful things from all of the coverage, really, of the US election was her for me. I thought, that's going to infuriate them because it wasn't Donald Trump's speech that actually has made such a big impact. But that, you know, just showed me that, you know, we have to keep saying these things. Everybody that gets the opportunity should do that.
Some people are saying that it was inappropriate because we shouldn't be mixing religion with politics, and that she abused her position, which was, you know, supposed to be a prayer service. What do you think about that?
I got my results from a home DNA test. To my complete shock, I found 2 half-sisters I never even knew existed. Turns out, the man I grew up thinking was my dad wasn't my dad at all. So I started a podcast called Missing Pieces, MPE Life, and it curates stories of people like me, people who find family secrets, people who were switched at birth. Every episode is like a documentary that helps find the missing pieces. Missing Pieces, MPE Life, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, that's another fascinating thing, because are these things really that separate? What she actually said was, as you said, you know, we need to think about the people that pick crops, that do this kind of work. That is what religion is about, isn't it? Isn't it thinking about people? So I think it's just people that didn't like what she said saying that. Had they liked what she said, we wouldn't be getting all these comments.
I know that we need a bit more balance in our, you know, British government, but I feel that we're getting there. We've got more of a mix of people from different backgrounds, working class, middle class, upper class, some women in there, people of different religions. There is a way to go, but I feel like there's more representation than there was like 50 years ago. And in the US now, we've seen a clique of like white male billionaires. I know there's a woman in there somewhere, but she's also a billionaire. It's the wealthiest presidential administration in modern history. There's 13 billionaires. I mean, they're making policies which affect millions of everyday people. Do you think they can do that in a fair way when they're so far removed from the lives of everyday people?
That's the thing that makes me, again, very sad, because people have voted for them thinking they're going to change my life, they're going to make my life amazing, but they don't understand people's lives. They've got no concept of what it's like to struggle to pay your bills every month. And that was what I was encouraged by, seeing more representation in our government. You know, you've got people that grew up in social housing and, you know, understand those things, because if you don't have any concept of that, understanding of that, how can you make policies about it? And, you know, someone who works in business, I often say that about the politicians that are making decisions about businesses. How many of them have actually worked in business, have actually started their own businesses, actually understand it? So I think that with the US, those billionaires are going to make decisions that are going to impact people's lives, but won't impact them. And they don't have any understanding of what everyday people's lives are like. And with a country like the USA, it's such a huge country with such different lives across different sectors of that society that it really worries me. I have a view on billionaires. You know, if you're does anyone need to be a billionaire? And if you are, and you're not using any of your wealth to do good, then surely that's something we need to rebalance in some way in society. Look, we don't have an answer for that, of course, but because it's the same in this country, we have extreme wealth as well. We have all the extremes, don't we? Extreme wealth, extreme poverty. And if you're not in politics to try and resolve and work on some of those things, then why are you in politics? Is it just about power? And that's what I see when I see those US billionaires. I think that's about power.
Yeah, and I think the poverty gap in the UK seems to be worsening. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Do you think enough people in British politics have come out and spoken about the new US president's policies?
No, I don't. I think there's been a lot of silence, and then there's been some strange comments made by some politicians as well, sort of congratulating him. I don't think it's been sort of over like so many comments that have congratulated him. I think there's been a level, and I understand that they have to do that because the USA is an important player in the world. So I understand that you know, as a politician, there has to be some messaging that goes on. But I suppose it's the silence that speaks the most.
Yeah, that's what I feel like. But I did see a message from the Mayor of London, which was quite touching. And it said, London is for everyone. Everyone's welcome here. And I thought that was a really positive message, actually, because I guess there are a lot of immigrants in London, and I wonder how they're feeling right now. What do you think? Yeah,
I saw that message too, and that was another thing that made me feel emotional, actually, to see that message, because, you know, think how people must be feeling. You know, it must be so tough. I have seen some great messages. I saw another one from Caroline Lucas, who was my MP. She stood down. Obviously, so she's not an MP now, so can be more open. She's made some great comments where she's really condemned what's been going on, and has said, particularly around the climate as well, like, you know, some of the decisions that have been made. So I've saw some great comments from her. There have been people that have spoken out, but I think it's difficult. I think it's MPs that have perhaps already lost the whip for whatever party they're in, or feel like they could speak out more. Those are the ones that you're seeing speaking out.
And traditionally, we've always had, you know, this special relationship with the US. Apparently, and I mean, yeah, it's tricky because they're our neighbours in a way, and we need to keep on certain terms with them. And where is the line where you can turn around to your friend and say, actually, what you're doing isn't right, and still maintain contact with them without them kind of cutting you off and being like, well, it's none of your business. So, you know, yeah, it's really, really tricky. But
is it a special relationship? Is it really? That's what I always think when I hear that phrase. Is it really? Is it more important to us in this country than it is to the USA? Do they really care? You know, I question whether it's a special relationship. And like you say, if it is, shouldn't we be able to say, you know, why are you withdrawing from the World Health Organization? You know, like, question some of these decisions.
Yeah, if you're good friends with someone, you should be able to challenge them when you think they're wrong. And I think on a personal level, I always try and put my hand up and speak out if I see wrongdoing in the workplace, you know, in life. And I want to be able to look back and say, yeah, I did speak up. And I think people that speak out, they'll look back and be able to feel in their conscience whether they did the right thing. Tell me, Mo, about your book, The Inclusion Journey. It's on over your shoulder there. How did it get started? What's it about? Talk to us about
lots of copies behind me. So The Inclusion Journey was published last year in August. It's available worldwide. It is available in the USA too. And it has world examples in it as well. So the book sets out the context about why inclusion is important and looks at examples and data. It's very data driven. So those people that debunk this kind of work need to look at all the facts that are in the book. And then it shows you how you could take an organisation through an inclusion journey, what are the things you need to do. And we've also got lots of case studies in there, so stories about what organisations have done. Some great stories, some sort of big companies, big global companies, but also just lots of smaller organisations too. So there's a great example of Lewes Football Club, who are a really tiny football club in Sussex, who were the first football club in the world to pay the men and women's team equally.
Amazing. I love that.
Yeah, it's groundbreaking that a tiny football club decided to do that. So it takes you through a lot of those kinds of examples and shows what you can do. You don't have to have big budgets to do everything. They just did it. And just shows you like all of the data. So there's a bit I remember researching and writing that's near the beginning that says, why is it that world leaders have usually been men from wealthy backgrounds? Is it that they are actually the best people to lead all of these countries? Or is there something else going on there that means those are the leaders we get, when actually there could be so many other people that could lead countries?
Yeah, of course. Well, is it anything to do with the millions and millions of pounds that they spend on their campaigns, you know?
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's interesting that you mentioned the football, because David Beckham came out yesterday and said, he wanted his daughter to have the same opportunities as her male counterparts. And then I thought, but what about football, you know? What about football?
What about football?
Start with football.
Also, he supported the Qatar World Cup, which, is a country with lots of things to address there. And I thought there's that thing, isn't there, where a lot of men will only speak out on these things when they have a daughter. So it's like, so before that you didn't care.
Yeah, it's only when it affects them. People speaking out when it affects them. It's been so good talking to you, Mo. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about the issue of diversity and Trump and how what goes on in the US might affect us here. It's been really good to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been great to chat to you.
Brilliant. Thank you. You've been listening to Angela Walker in Conversation. You can find more information on my website, angelawalkerreports.com. Till next time, take care. Goodbye.